Hi, everyone. I'd like to introduce to you Buddhism in this 30-minute Zoom presentation. And to do so, I will share my screen. Let me bring that down a little bit and pop over here and open up the lesson plan in Canvas. And here at the top, we see a picture of the Buddha. And the image of the Buddha is located in so many of our various stores. I used to shop at Ross and Home Goods. I haven't been shopping lately, but Ross, Home Goods, you go into any kind of garden center, you oftentimes will see statues of the Buddha. And why do we find the image of the Buddha so appealing? I think from my perspective, and why I have so many Buddhas, is it's a very peaceful image. It's a very serene, in harmony, a meditative, introspective. It's very calming to look at. So here is an example of a Buddha I just grabbed right next to me. And you see his eyes are downcast, his hands are in meditation position, and his legs are crossed. So he's sitting in what's called lotus position. He's meditating and expresses a great sense of peace and serenity, calmness, even happiness, one could say, because he's not stressed, okay, which is a very great state to be at. And so a lot of us are exposed to the Buddha through those various images, but we may not understand a lot about what Buddhism entails, and that's what I'd like to do, is introduce that to you today. So the word Buddha means the enlightened one, and the religion following the teachings of the Buddha is referred to as Buddhism, or the Buddhist traditions. Again, there's multiple branches. The actual teacher, the Buddha, actually has a name referred to as Siddhartha. And Siddhartha then, at the age of around 35, was recognized by disciples to be enlightened, and from there on referred to as the Buddha. And how many Buddhists are there in the world? This is my basic introduction here. In terms of the numbers in the world, it's the fourth largest religion, and there's about 500 million or 500 million, and they're located all around the world. It's international. You'll find Buddhism in China, in Japan, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Thailand, Sri Lanka, even Indonesia. You'll find Buddhists even in America. All around the world you can find Buddhist centers, but some populations are certainly much stronger in the Buddhist number. And so in North America, it's interesting to note that near Mount Sac and Hacienda Heights, there's a Buddhist temple referred to as the Shilai Buddhist Temple. And the Shilai Buddhist Temple is one of the largest in North America. When you have a chance one day, please visit that temple. It used to be an assignment for this class, but it's no longer required at this time. I should not say that in case you're taking my class at a time when the pandemic's over, but I am lecturing right now during the pandemic. So I'm sorry, not where is Buddhism located, but when did Buddhism start? So the time period is during was called the Axle Age, and it was 2,500 years ago. And the Axle Age is a time when there's a lot of change occurring, and there's a pivotal time in world history. And we have a lot of philosophies developing at this time. We have Greek philosophy, we have Indian philosophy, we have Chinese philosophy. Let's just talk about those three for a second. Those all kind of emerge around 2,500 years ago, around that time period. And it's called the Axle Age. And the Axle Age is this period of time right before that time, like around 800 BCE to 200 BCE, or 2,500 years ago, is right in the middle of it. And we have the Upanishads coming into existence, we have Jainism coming into existence, and we have Buddhism coming into existence. Not only do we have the Greek philosophers developing, but we also have Chinese philosophy with Confucian and Taoist thought. It's a very important time period where people were looking for compassion, people were looking for a higher transcendent, introspective approach to life. People were looking for harmony and balance and peace. So it was definitely a time possibly when there was a lot of pain and suffering, and people were kind of looking for something beyond that. So Buddhism itself is outside of the Hindu fold because it rejects the caste system and the authority of the Vedas. It's got a lot of Hindu ideas. It fits a lot with the Eastern paradigm in terms of reincarnation and samsara, the concept of birth and death and getting out of it. Moksha. Buddhism uses a slightly different word choices. They refer to nirvana as to blow out, and what are you blowing out? Ego and pain and suffering, and that's through really liberating yourself from the wheel of birth and death. So there's a lot of Eastern parallels here with Hinduism and Jainism and Sikhism and Buddhism fits right in there with them. It's definitely an Eastern religion, but it certainly has its own nuances as well, as we'll learn about today. So the founder of it is Siddhartha. He has an interesting biography, and the story about Siddhartha is that his mother passes away when he's just, an infant right away after the childbirth. And it's argued that he already enters into the world of pain and suffering by losing his mother right away. And so that will give us some psychological insight of what Siddhartha had to go through. He is raised in what used to be India, but is now referred to as Nepal. And again, 2,500 years ago, I'm giving you just rough estimates here. And he was raised by his father, and his father's his stepmother. His father married his aunt, very common to do. So the father, at the time of the Buddha's death, the time of the Buddha's birth, he had his son looked at by very wise kind of soothsayers that looked at, it's called divination. He looked at the child and tried to figure out what the future of the child would be. And those wise men said he'd either be one of two things. He's either going to be a very well-known worldly leader, following in his father's footsteps, or be a spiritual leader. And his father, it said, wanted to protect him from the tragedies and hardships in the world, because he wanted his child not to go on that introspective religious quest and become that religious leader, but wanted him to follow in his footsteps and become a world-class leader as a king. And so it said that his father set up kind of a very protective bubble existence, protecting his son from seeing any kind of tragedies, pain, suffering. So Siddhartha would be raised with nothing but beauty and happiness and health and wealth and all of that. And he continued on to his being a young man, marrying, having his first child. He had a son named Rahula. And then Siddhartha, somewhere around the age of 29, 30, is able to venture out of the kingdom. And it said that he saw 4 sights that were life-changing sights. These 4 sights, which we'll go over in a minute, just set him on that quest to try to find something beyond that worldly existence he was in with his father, that kingdom life. He wanted to find what's the meaning of to life, what's the purpose of it all. There must be something greater. And so that was a pivotal catalyst moment, what he saw. And what are those 4 sights? So first of all, he saw death. He had never really witnessed that before. He saw a dead corpse outside of the kingdom when he got out of the kingdom that time. And that made him wake up to the fact that life is filled with tragedies, and it's not all glorious and beautiful. There are pain and suffering that people experience in death. He saw somebody who was ill, again, reiterating the idea that life is filled with terrible stuff. I mean, there's no way to say it. I mean, somebody who's ill and somebody who's diseased and in pain, it's not an easy existence. So is this what the meaning of life is about? He questioned. He saw somebody who was aging. He saw the aging process. Again, his father said to protect him from that. So everybody in the kingdom was young and healthy and vibrant, but here he saw outside of the kingdom somebody decrepit, somebody in a state of aging, somebody like arthritis and wrinkles and slow movement, and just the hardship of the aging body. And then he saw somebody who, the 4th sight was somebody who was religious, a religious mendicant, somebody who was practicing or going on a religious quest or a journey to, some higher purpose of life. So those 4 sights, so somebody religious, a dead body, an aging body, and an ill body. And so those 4 sights sparked with him an interest into leaving that worldly life he was living, kissing his wife on the cheek as she slept, kissing his child, and escaping out and now going on his spiritual quest. And so it's kind of a fascinating story. It reminds me a lot of the story of Mahabharata. You can draw a direct parallel here of both being princes, both around the age of 30, both leaving their spouses. Mahabharata having a daughter, Buddha having a son, but very young, and leaving them and then going on their journey in life to find something beyond the world. And the story is that when he left the kingdom, he immediately cut his hair real short. Okay, so the Buddha statues will always have the very short hair. He cut his hair off. He went on a quest for 4 to 5 years, it said. It varies on the interpretation, but he went on a quest for almost half a decade. And he was practicing various austerities, trying to become enlightened, trying to wake up to some higher reality, a higher perspective. And while he was practicing these austerities, he may have even practiced the Jain asceticism. He ends up eventually becoming so weak, so ill, so decrepit because he has no strength, because he's not eating, that he decides to eat. It's a kind of a rice bowl of pudding, get his strength back. He decides the middle path is the better path for him, the path of moderation. He decides to meditate under a famous tree called the Bodhi tree and not to move from that spot until he's enlightened. The story continues that during his state under that tree, as he's trying to become enlightened and wake up to a higher understanding of reality, that he's tempted by what's called Mara. And Mara is kind of not so much a real demonic being, but sometimes it's described like that, but symbolically understood to his own like shadow self, trying to tempt him to, hey, you know, you can go back to that cushy life, you can go back to the kingdom, you go back to resume your position as being a prince. But he pushed through that, he pushed through those temptations, and it said that he transcended to higher stages of consciousness and eventually was recognized as enlightened. His first sermon that he gave was to some of the followers of asceticism, and he talked about the middle path, and he talked about his first sermon he talked about was called his teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and they became his first converts. They recognized that his insights were something to be admired and follow. So he continued, just once I'm on the bio, I'll continue on. He continued on teaching and spreading the message of Buddhism kind of throughout India, all the way up until his 80s. And he passed away in his around 80 years old. And it said he had eaten a meal, and it might have been some case of mushrooms that were poisonous or something served in the meal, not necessarily intentional, just picking of wrong mushrooms, and it caused an illness of which he died shortly after that. So Siddhartha's death is kind of an interesting one. And his whole biography is fascinating if you really to study in detail. It's very interesting. Okay. A book I recommend on the life of the Buddha is written by Karen Armstrong, and it's called The Buddha. And she does an excellent job walking you through his biography in 6 chapters. Okay, so what is his first sermon did he teach when he emerged from that Bodhi tree experience? He talks about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And the Four Noble Truths are 4 insights that are very simple. They're very easy to grasp, and I'm going to walk you through those. And the final one is actually in the Eightfold Path. It's the 8 steps to becoming enlightened. So the Four Noble Truths, the first 2 deal with kind of a problem Buddha's recognizing, and the next 2 deal with a solution. So Noble Truth number 1 is all life is dukkha, which can translate a few ways. It can translate as all life is suffering. It can translate as all life is unsatisfactory. All life is painful. And that may seem, some people may say, well, isn't that a little pessimistic? But he's saying if you really look at life, it's just filled with so much pain. It's filled with, sadly enough, it's filled with people on ventilators who cannot breathe. It's filled with cancer patients. It's filled with car accidents. It's filled with, just so much. I can't even describe how much pain and suffering there is in the world. Just orphans and just look at every case of any person's life. There's just going to be a lot of pain and suffering there. Yes, there's happy moments, but it's always followed by a lot of tragedy. Somewhere in your life, every one of us is going to get a disease, and somewhere in your life, every one of us is going to die. And there's just a lot of sadness in the world. So that's his understanding. Like, life is filled with a lot of tragedy. That's a reality. It's not a pessimistic perspective. It's just reality understood. Okay. Now, what causes this suffering? A lot of the suffering, he says, is caused by tanha. So dukkha is caused by tanha. Tanha translates as clinging or craving or chasing after things of this world. So again, this is a problem. Noble truth number 1 and 2 are the problems. So we cling after things. We cling after health. But what happens? We get sick. We cling after youth. But what happens? Our bodies get old. Our joints get old. Our level of energy drops down. Our skin droops. Everything, just changes in the body. And eventually we end up at death state. So we cling to things of the material world, but they mean nothing ultimately because they're just a waste of your energy. You chase after stuff. You chase after the best car and the best house and the best outfit and the best makeup or the best whatever it is. I don't know, whatever you're chasing, but it's just all empty chases, and it really leads to more suffering and more tragedy, not happiness. So all of that being said, you go to the solution here. You can stop suffering by stopping chasing after and clinging after and wanting stuff of this world. And how do you do that? How do you become immersed and an enlightened human being? And that's number 4, follow the Eightfold Path. So let's talk about that. The Eightfold Path is represented as the Buddha symbol here. This looks like a captain's wheel. It's got 8 spokes, and the center of it represents enlightenment. So we become enlightened through those 8 steps. And instead of going more each step, you can understand it as 3 parts. And it's an aspect of wisdom, morality, and meditation. And those 3 parts can lead to enlightenment. Wisdom is having the right views, understanding these Four Noble Truths, really understanding them, and having the right intention to become enlightened and to pursue those 4 steps, and not pursue the 4 steps, but waking up to the 4th step and pursuing enlightenment. So having that right desire to do that. Part of our process to becoming enlightened is being a moral person. So having the right speech. And it reminds me a lot of the Jain vows, not gossiping and lying and slandering, right action, following a life of ahimsa, following a life of compassion, and right livelihood, just like the Jains. The Buddhists don't take it as to the same level of the Jains, but definitely that's the whole idea that our life and our livelihood have to be focused on not hurting and being a peaceful, compassionate human being. Now, meditation is these last 3 steps, and so it's right effort, mindfulness, and meditation. There's a lot of talk today about mindfulness. It's being in the moment, not constantly going to the futuristic ideas or thinking about past regrets, but just being here now in the moment, and how much stress melts away when we're in that moment, in that mindful moment, just being. And it's so hard for our minds to slow down. In Buddhism, they refer to it as the monkey mind that's always hyperactively jumping tree to tree. And if you could just stay one focused, centered, sometimes I will refer to the eye centers, just close your eyes and just be in that moment. And it's a very difficult thing for the human mind to just stop and slow down. And so Buddha talked about mindfulness and what we can do to allow ourselves to just be in that moment. And meditation, the act of actually meditating itself, is withdrawing your consciousness to higher stages of awareness. A beautiful book on meditation that's written by a neuroscientist is called Waking Up by Sam Harris, and it explains he kind of practices Buddhism, but not so much religiously, more like a neuroscientist, and how to meditate and change your brain states and experiencing higher awareness. And he wrote a book from kind of a scientist blending in with a Buddhist approach. It's really a very cool book if you wanted to learn more about meditation. The philosophy of Buddhism is, let's start here, atheistic, in that they don't, it's not about a theistic Godhead. It's not paying homage to a God up there, anything like that. It's not theism, and it's not polytheism either. It's atheistic, so it's transcending the concept of gods and goddesses to a higher level of consciousness, and so does Jainism fit right in there. The Indian terms fit beautifully here with the idea of karma and reincarnation. All of that, they say that we live life after life. That's the whole samsara concept. There's a multi-layered universe that we can, when we die, enter into multiple possible realms of existence. Some of them heavenly, some of them hellish, some of them earthly, but nonetheless, that's still part of samsara, and the goal is to get even out of all of that to higher awareness. Now, there's 3 marks of existence: anatta, anicca, and dukkha. Dukkha I've already explained, and let me explain these 2 here. Anicca, let's start with that one. Anicca means impermanent. So there's nothing in this world that's permanent. Everything is transitory. So your body's transitory. Your consciousness is always in a state of change. Everything, the world itself is always in a state of change. There's nothing permanent. It's always changing, constantly in a state of change. It's that famous quote from Greek philosophy: you cannot step into the same river twice, because you're different and the river's different. It's always in a state of change. And so that's interesting because it relates to Buddhist philosophy. If everything's in a state of change, there's nothing really to cling to. You cling to stuff, but it's always in a state of change. So it's kind of a waste of effort and energy to cling in that sense. Anatta is a very strange, it's beautiful philosophy, I actually think, but it's going to be very strange to the Western mind or the Western paradigm. It's the idea of no soul or no Atman, A in front of Atman. So remember in Hinduism, the Atman is Brahman concept, that you are the infinite. And here it's saying there is no on. So how can you argue that? It's because they're taking that real idea of impermanence and saying there is no unchanging you. You're always in a state of change. There is no kernel you that is unchangeable. And moment to moment, biologically you're changing, intellectually you're changing, emotionally you're changing, life after life you're changing. And so how can you reincarnate if there's no soul? It's kind of like, the analogy would be like a candle flame that's flickering. And as it's flickering, it's always in a state of change. Looks still from afar, but when you really look at it, it's a state of change. And when you go into a next life, a new flame, the flame continues in that state of flickering change as well. So there's no unchanging you, permanent self in that sense. So that's very fascinating, very philosophical, deep concepts here. The goal is nirvana, and nirvana is not a heaven, it's not a place. It sounds like a lot of people think nirvana, oh, I get to go to nirvana. It's not a go-to, it's a state of consciousness. It literally means to extinguish. What are you blowing out? You're blowing out illusion, you're blowing out, or illusion or delusion, you're blowing out ego, you're blowing out pain and suffering, you're blowing out misperceptions, and out of it emerges that enlightens you. Okay, can one attain nirvana while living? Yes, it's argued that in Buddhist philosophy that the Buddha is somebody who is in a state of nirvana. So, and it's the goal for human beings to pursue that. They don't just recognize, I mean, Buddha had said there was Buddhas before him, and even there'll be Buddhas after him. So the whole goal for us is also to follow that path of Buddhism. Okay, the creed. So there's three jewels or three treasures that are called the creed of Buddhism, and it's I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma, which in this case translates as teachings of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. And I take refuge in the Sangha, which is the community of Buddhists. So I take the refuge in the teacher, his teachings, and the community. Historical developments, I'm kind of looking at the clock and trying to wrap this up. So after the Buddha dies, around the age of 80, Buddhism starts to kind of go into splits. As soon as the teacher dies, there's going to be different interpretations of what that teacher argued. And so very soon after, we're going to start to see emerge these two major splits in Buddhism called the Theravada and the Mahayana, which I'll explain down here in a minute. But just pointing out that there's councils that are held. There's several Buddhist councils that they get together and they discuss his teachings, and there's some disagreements. And out of that emerges different philosophical schools of thought. Another thing that happens during the historical period is one Indian emperor converts to Buddhism and starts a missionary movement and really spreads Buddhism beyond the Indian soil, and it goes into Sri Lanka and elsewhere, and so that's a significant thing. We have Islam entering into India about 1,000 years ago, and that impacts Buddhism a lot. Buddhism really leaves Indian land about that time period. Hinduism reemerges as well at this time and kind of absorbs Buddhism. And how is it able to absorb Buddhism and kind of places that is under the umbrella of Buddhism? I'm sorry, under umbrella of Hinduism. They look upon the Buddha as an avatar of Vishnu. And when they do that, they say, oh no, he's really in the Hindu fold. He's really just an incarnation of Vishnu. And so that was a way of which Buddhism gets kind of embraced and absorbed into Hinduism. When you go to India today, you don't really see Buddhist pockets here and there, or Buddhist schools of thought. Buddhism's really more, not in South Asia, but more in Japan, definitely, in China and Korea and so forth. Okay, so Buddhism really historically leaves India and then takes off everywhere else. Okay, three main branches of Buddhism. One is the Theravada, one is the Mahayana, and one is the Vajrayana, and that's, I'm going to describe it as those three is the easy way to capture it. The Theravada, they refer to themselves as the tradition of the elders. They think that they have the more accurate historical perspective, that the Buddha was just, like when we talk about the Buddha, they think of the Buddha as an historical being, Siddhartha, and that he was a model for us to follow. And we can't so much pray to the Buddha or Buddha beings of any sort to receive special grace and benefit. Rather, enlightenment is an individual effort. It's like the hard sweat of actually meditating and focusing and following that eightfold path. So it's an individual effort. The goal is to become enlightened, which is an arhat, and to be a wise individual. So it's the individual effort, not prayers to anybody, to really become enlightened and to attain the higher state of nirvana. One, the monastic life is required. They thought that the Buddha argued for that. And locations, Sri Lanka is primarily Theravada, Thailand, Burma, and Cambodia. So the Theravada argued that this is kind of like they're sticking to what they thought really the historical Buddha argued. The Mahayana is called the larger vehicle, and Mahayana refers to larger. It's argued a different perspective. Okay, it's really interesting. Number one, it says Buddhism is open for everybody. It's open to all. It's open to the monastics. It's open to the laity. Anybody and everybody can become enlightened. It's not simply for the monastic. That instead of focusing on like wisdom as what it's all about, it's compassion. They have this concept of the bodhisattva, and the bodhisattva from them, it's very simple. It's the idea of somebody who is enlightened, who may help you in your journey towards enlightenment. And that bodhisattva could be somebody who they recognize is even living today, like the Dalai Lama is recognized as a bodhisattva. Various famous Buddhist monks may be recognized as enlightened and bodhisattvas here to help out humanity. Or it could be somebody who has passed, has died, but instead of melt into the infinite sea of the divine or emptiness, sometimes Buddhism talks about it that way, instead of melting into that infinite ocean, that they have chosen to help out humanity by remaining as kind of like a heavenly bodhisattva that you can pray to and seek compassion and help from. And in no way is that necessarily a god, but it has that kind of tendency of prayers to and homage to. So definitely bhakti towards, but not God in a theistic classic way. And so moving down here, the goal in life is not been so much to attain nirvana, but the goal, is to attain nirvana, to be that compassionate individual. Okay, they recognize the three bodies of the Buddha. One is the historical, physical Siddhartha. They recognize there's like a spiritual Buddha or bodhisattvas that can help you, and then let's just say that. And then the ultimate is the ultimate sum total of the divine itself. They'll refer to as the Buddha. So the Buddha is both the physical, the spiritual realm, and the ultimate. Okay. So locations, China, Japan, Tibet, and Korea. And then there's a lot of subdivisions of the Mahayana. So Zen is in Japan, and they were all, the monastic order that was all black. A lot of focus on meditation. They have the very famous koans, which are kind of riddles of the mind. We have Pure Land Buddhism. They focus on Amitabha as the bodhisattva. And at the time of death, if you were to repeat the name of Amitabha, it can really help you in your spiritual journey in death. We have even Tibetan Buddhism sometimes is seen as a branch of Mahayana, or sometimes the Tibetan is given its own branch, and I put it right here as its own branch. And this branch is called the Vajrayana, and the Vajrayana Buddhism, it referred to as a very strong, sometimes referred to as the thunderbolt or diamond, because it's really strong, like diamonds can cut through glass, they say. So it's really strong, and they argue in one lifetime you can become enlightened. It's that powerful, the argument. And this is a little bit fits in what's called the Tibetan school of thought, and they're famous for their mandalas, which are actually quite beautiful. They will make mandalas, which is kind of a Tibetan imagery, and you can buy tapestries with mandalas, you can buy carpets with beautiful mandalas, but the classic one is they make it out of sand, of colored sand, and they do that, and it may take them months, it may take them, weeks, days, months, weeks, years. They make these beautiful, intricate mandalas, and then in one ceremony, they just swoosh it away with a brush. And it's supposed to represent something, and it's supposed to represent anicca. Remember that concept of impermanence. There's nothing permanent in this world, so don't attach yourself to this world. So that mandala is that sweeping away and waking up to the fact that there's something beyond the material world of clinging. Okay, they're famous for their chants, the Tibetan chants, and those guttural voices. Okay, they're famous for their prayer reels. They'll spin a wheel, and within the wheel will be a little prayer, and as they spin it, it's kind of viewed from their perspective, it's being said. They're famous for the Dalai Lama as an example of a bodhisattva, and he's recognized as the 14th Dalai Lama. He's in his 80s right now. It's said that there was 13 Dalai Lamas before him. It's the same Dalai Lama. They argue the same being has incarnated time and time again to come into the world to help out humanity. And a bodhisattva is somebody who is enlightened that chooses to come back out of compassion or chooses to help out humanity. And very famous in the Vajrayana school is the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It was written several centuries ago, and it's this argument, it's a book that explains what the soul, and I just said that there was no soul, but what the anatman, what this forever changing, flickering flame, when you die, instead of getting pulled back into this world, how to continue on your spiritual journey. And it's really a book explaining what you should do when you pass on into that next stage of reality. So it's fascinating in that sense. One thing it says, I'll just throw this out there, instead of looking at the images that you see in that death stage, you're going, let's say, through the tunnel and you're seeing the light, you're seeing all these images, don't focus on that. They said turn the attention back to yourself and ask who is doing that seeing, who is doing that viewing, because that's where spirituality lies, and introspection back to you, which is fascinating. Okay, location is Tibet, so I already mentioned that. So we oftentimes see the Buddha as this big fat round Buddha, and I want to clarify that that is not Siddhartha. Okay, Siddhartha would be more this really skinny Buddha. Even my Buddha here would be more Siddhartha. See how thin he is, but that big fat, happy, laughing Buddha is recognized as a bodhisattva from the past. And here's a little story about this. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm down here. This is a little story about the laughing Buddha, and it's said that like 1,000 years ago, there's a Chinese Buddhist, a monastic who's recognized as enlightened, and he's honored. And he said that in end time, I'm sorry, not end times, that's a very Western idea, that eventually one day he may come back, referred to as Maitreya, the future Buddha. But he's more about information about him is found here. So that round, happy Buddha. And then this one here is, there was a lot of confusion students have about the three Buddhas. So I kind of offered a little link here to offer more explanation for you. And what else do I want to say? I have a mini lecture that summarizes some of this stuff as well. Required reading. I'm almost coming up to my 30 minutes. I think I'm there right now. You have readings and films and a post question. And for your post, I give you a couple options, or you can do both. Okay, read the literature, which is really cool to do, or apply Buddhism back to you. So very nice. I will take this off. This Zoom lecture was from another term, and I will take that off so you can have just this condensed 30-minute one. Okay, thank you so much for watching. Let me stop share. I hope this offered you some insights, and I appreciate your attention. And namaste. I bow to the divine in you. Yay. Thank you. Bye-bye.